Andrew. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
My pleasure. I am very excited to have you all here today. One, it's exciting to have a dynamic duo. I'm used to seeing just two rectangles within the rectangle, and now we're like upping the percentage of creative minds here, which is really really exciting for me.
That's right. Yeah. It's been fun to tag team this with Andrew. And when I found out he was moving from the Bay Area down to LA, I knew I had to keep him. So obviously had to start a business with him.
There you go. That's what you got to do, right? Yeah. The options are buying property, starting, working on a business together. So I appreciate getting married. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure Andrew's in the process of planning his wedding in a couple of weeks. And I'm pretty sure I still talk to him more than his fiance does.
Yeah.
I think that's accurate. Yeah.
Well, we will hopefully spin that into something that is beneficial for our audience here today. Welcome, everyone. My name is Ashley. I'm with the Discover team here at Teachable, which means that I get to hang out with amazing creators and ask them questions about their experience and their wisdom. While we're getting started, if you could just drop us a little comment that you can see us and hear us, so we know that you're good to go. Would also love to know where you're tuning in from. It looks like we've got a handful of folks here. Judy from Pahrump, I love it. Nevada, it's so good to see. It's one of my favorite. Judy's like Judy, I think you probably could have a master's degree in Discover live events. She's around and collecting lots of wisdom. Thank you, awesome. Emmanuel can see in here. That's great to know. Bay Area representing, Barcelona in the house, Philly in the house.
Wow, all over.
Nice. Mexico. We are geographically diverse today. Oh, San Diego. Okay. Wonderful to have you all here. Like I mentioned, my name's Ashley. I will be hanging out in the comments. So if you have questions or notes or anything that you want to bring up to Andrew and Kyle while they are doing their thing, feel free to let me know. Other than that, a few quick notes. There will be a replay available for this session. So if you miss any of the wisdom that these fellows are here imparting today, don't fret. We will make sure that you have access to this stream. And you can always replay via the YouTube channel that you're on right now. So if you like this kind of content, if you want to be notified when we have Andrew and Kyle back, then just like and subscribe on that YouTube page and you'll be the first to know. What else? I think that covers the housekeeping stuff. So I am going to pose one final question and ask how many of you all are familiar with either Kyle and or Andrew's work, maybe as individuals or as a duo. And if you are not familiar with their work, then what was it that motivated you to join us here today? I know that they've got a lot of great content to cover, but I'm just kind of curious to know what you audience are looking to learn. I know these guys are incredible visual storytellers, and my business is storytelling for social impact, and I'm always looking for ways to visualize the narrative. And so I've really loved absorbing both the work that you all have put out into the world. Andrew, award-winning LA-based photographer. I'm sure that I'm hoping that you will get to see some of his fantastic work. Kyle, same thing, photographer and videographer, based in San Francisco, although currently traveling in Minneapolis. So representing the Midwest as well. And you guys do a lot of really terrific, like striking landscape work, play with visual scenes, which I'm really excited to learn about. And the course that you are here to talk about today is photography for creators, which is really the Discover audience full of creators, all stripes. And I think there's a really big need to kind of put your best self on display with visuals. So I'm excited to hear more about y'all's experience, and excited to bring this course, which, stick around till the end because there's a pretty sweet deal that these guys have for you. And I know that you, in addition to being practitioners of this visual storytelling art, you also are coaches and mentors. And in addition to even the course that you're offering today, you have like a next tier of that kind of stuff. So people who really want to go into the nitty gritty of learning how their own photography can improve, whether it's equipment or kind of mastering the editing process. You have this additional option of like a higher touch coaching program, which I think is really cool. Would love to hear a little bit more about that. But tell me first, how did you all start working together? How did you find each other?
Awesome.
That's funny. It's a funny story. I was actually, like some of the people in the comments here, I was a fan of Andrew's from afar for a very long time. And one day he asked if anybody wanted to go out and shoot with him. And I immediately responded and was excited enough to hear that he was inviting me to go out and hang out with him. So I started out as a fanboy and later became a friend. And we're members of the Bay Shooters team. So it's kind of a global network of shooters communities. So check your local area. There's a high likelihood that there is a shooters community in a city near you. So we have UK, Philly, LA, Pacific Northwest, Chicago, you name it. Just sort of a collective group of folks where, kind of the idea is to share images and get to know each other from around your location. But then we do a lot of work on hosting meetups and just kind of introducing a lot of people. And I've seen some of the people in the comments here that we've had a chance to link up with at some of our Bay Shooters events. And it's really cool to photography is such a beautiful community where you can kind of connect and interact over something you all have a shared vision and a shared hobby. You see somebody with a nice camera and that they're instantly committed because you're like, I know you spent $5,000 on that thing that you're holding in your hand, so you must be into it. We must be into the same thing together. And at bare minimum, you can say that you like shooting Sony or Canon, or you can get over a fight over whether or not you like Nikon or not. So yeah, it's been fun to kind of work together.
Awesome. And it looks like there are a lot of folks that are here joining us who are like already in your creators course, which is very cool. Yeah, this is awesome. Lots of folks who are curious about how to video stories and build course content for various lessons in their own work. So love this audience collection we have here.
Awesome. Yeah, I love it too.
It's gonna be fun.
Yeah.
Should we get into it?
Yeah, we'll turn it over to you all and let's bring this up.
Awesome. Yeah. So before we even get started, Kyle and I just want to say thank you to everyone for taking the time out of their day to be here. We know that life is crazy and there's just so many things that you could be doing. So we appreciate all of you that are here today. What we're going to be talking about most of the day today is what we call photography with purpose. And this is a technique and a mindset and honestly so much more, but that's kind of what it is. And we've used it to help not only our own work immensely, but also a lot of our students as well. So that's kind of the basis of what we're going to be covering today. Ashley already gave us a really nice intro, so I don't know if there's really too much more that we need to do there, really. Kyle loves cold brew. That's something that we didn't cover, and it's also super important.
Important to the lifeblood and survival of Kyle is cold brew. That is true.
It's important.
Yeah.
I have my two hot and cold.
There you go.
I'm with you on that.
Yep. So yeah, in addition to being photographers ourselves, we love to teach people as well too. And we've been teaching other photographers for the last several years as well too. And so that's just a passion of ours too. Anything else here, Kyle?
Yeah, no, I think that about covers it. Let's dive on in.
All right, cool. So there we go. So quick rundown of the agenda for today. So we're actually going to start off just by diving into the #1 secret to getting better photos. After that, we're going to go through a bunch of different ways that you can be more impactful and intentional with your compositions. After that, we're going to show you kind of a step-by-step process on how you can edit your photos with purpose, a few different ways. And then at the end, we're going to talk through our Photography for Creators course a little bit that we mentioned before. And then, of course, at the end, we'll have a Q&A as well, too. And like Ashley mentioned, we'll be giving away a few couple freebies to anyone who stays towards the end as well.
Yeah, and before we dive in, I know Ashley did a great job of hyping us up and making us seem really, really cool. But I think it's really important to also understand that, you know, while we do have some accolades and accomplishments and things, right, we definitely weren't always there. Here's a couple of our images that we took when we were just starting out, and it's very clear that like these are not up to par with anything that we would be excited to share at this point. And it's just kind of really want to call out that like we all have been there, we've all struggled. You know, we would see great images online or in print or wherever it is, and you kind of try to recreate them, and you're kind of stuck, right? You're sitting there and you don't really know what's good or why they're good, and you certainly don't really know how to kind of reproduce something similar. And you know, sort of in that next stage in the journey, if you go to the next slide, is you sort of enter these sort of stages, right? First is what we call the slider fiddling stage in your editing journey, right? You just crank things to the left and right and see what they do. You maybe abuse the clarity slider like crazy, and you see it have results. So you think, oh, well, like this must be what I'm supposed to do because I can visually see that it's doing something. When in reality, you learn later on, and something that we'll be teaching a lot more is, you know, being a lot more selective and massaging things nicely is a much more effective way to do it. Then you kind of get to that next stage where you go a little bit down the page and you see this tone curve thing. You open it up, you have no idea what this means. You close it, you bail, you back out quickly. And you know, that's a part of the journey for everybody, right? And then you kind of get to this next stage of the process where you know, you see this logo sitting on your desktop. You've opened it once and you're like, wow, Photoshop. What am I supposed to do with this? What are all these new buttons or all these things? I'm just gonna, you know, I'm gonna back out of that one. I'm gonna leave it alone as if it's that evil furnace in the basement of a horror movie, right? Like that's a no. That's a no from me. I'm gonna pass. I'll stick with what I know. And then maybe you kind of go a little bit further in your journey. You get to the beautiful place, the shining pearl gates of YouTube University. And take it from myself. My full-time job, I am actually employed by YouTube. I am a YouTube content strategist. That's where I get the majority of my paycheck outside of photography from. Take it from me, YouTube is amazing. It's the greatest invention ever in my mind. But it does have an issue, and that is that it optimizes for super clickable titles, fast-paced education, and it doesn't really allow for you to build upon itself. Or the other problem is you have to know the name of the technique that you're looking for in order to find it, in order to achieve that particular outcome. We're obviously here on YouTube. You found this in some way, which is great. But maybe you don't know the exact terminology behind how to create like a beautiful, dreamy glow to your images. You don't know that the thing that you should be typing for that is how to do the Orton effect in Photoshop, right?
Ooh,
so there we go.
Don't know what you don't know sometimes.
That's right. I put out a YouTube video on that. You can go check it out after this.
Oh, yay.
So we've all sort of fumbled through this, right? Like Andrew and I were both self-taught. We didn't go to school for any of this, right? And that's where a lot of people we think are in this process as well, right? And so what we want to do is sort of help to kind of give our students like a defined framework upon which to build. And so I guess before we kind of continue on and give you that framework, we do have a quick exercise for you.
Yep. So just in the chat here, what we've done, we've highlighted some of the biggest struggles that are commonly faced by photographers. And what we'd like you to do is just in the chat, just type a number that corresponds to the thing that you're currently struggling with the most. So for example, if you're struggling with editing, just type a 3 in there. If you're struggling with finding creativity when you're out shooting, type a 5 in there. And let's just wait a couple minutes here and see. We're curious just to see where everyone's kind of at and where everyone is struggling at the moment.
Some confidence in the field, some everything. Finding creativity. 1 and 3.
Editing or lots of 3s. Yeah.
Editing, lots of editing. Editing is certainly the spot where I think it's the most difficult, the most challenging, because there's so much to do, and you have so much more time to do it. It's a whole other
setting.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's a thing you do without the camera in your hands, without looking through, to me, that's like, oh, but I figured out how to take the picture. That's where I start.
I'm done, right? And that's we'll talk about that a bit later too, but we want to combine the photography aspect with the editing. I don't want to give away too much, but yeah, we'll talk about that a bit later. So, okay, awesome. Well, so it seems like we do have a good mix of challenges that we're facing, lots of editing, some creativity. Awesome. So this is good. Good news is
presume a number 6. We're just gonna have to go over everything.
Yeah.
The good news is it's all related, right?
Yep. Yeah. And we're here to help, and I think you're gonna learn, no matter what you typed, you're gonna learn a lot from the presentation here. So solution to the struggle that most people face with these problems, right? And our solution is photography with purpose. But what does that even mean, right? It's kind of like a term that could mean a lot of different things. To us, it really means getting in the mindset of being intentional with your creative decisions. And so this could look just countless different ways. So through the rest of the webinar, we're going to show you very specific ways to do this. But it really comes down to, rather than randomly starting to just jump on an edit without thinking things through first, you want to actually have purpose behind the decisions that you're making, both when you're out in the field, when you're editing, kind of everything combined. All right, and so how does this work for us, right? Photography with purpose for Kyle and I, it's taken our images from what we see here on the left, which I don't think either of us are very proud of, to now taking images more like this. And we can say the same things for a lot of our students as well too, where we've been able to transform their images from the left to the images on the right-hand side there.
Yeah, and so getting to that number 1 secret, right? So the secret to this really is, like, these things don't happen by accident, right? So from creative framing or these post-production techniques that we'll talk through, or like patiently waiting for that super opportune moment where the train is coming perfectly and it's wrapping around this bridge, and now that's framed perfectly by this building, or sort of creating these sort of purpose-driven decisions that we're talking about. There is really sort of just this one secret to these better images. And that is that the moment that we started thinking about these things holistically and giving each decision a lot more intention, that's when you start to see the improvements to your photography that you really just didn't think were possible before. So what you need to start doing is think about what you want the viewer to be looking at when you're taking your images. What's the story that you want to tell? And then how can you best capture that story? Mm-hmm. And then you want to be starting to like shoot with the edit in mind as well. So what are the ways that you can edit that story together in post-production? And then where also will that story be delivered? So thinking about when you're taking the image, thinking about how will the viewer be looking at it? Will it be on social media? Will it be on their phone? Maybe we want to turn our camera sideways and shoot that vertically, for instance, right? What are the other things, the other instances in which we want to be creating for? So creating something for YouTube versus creating something for Twitter versus creating something for a different social media. All of those viewers are in a different mindset when they're consuming that content. So we want to be producing content and thinking about that content as we're producing it in real time, and then editing it with that in mind. So it's all this holistic approach. And to really do that, we have to start thinking about some rules and some tool sets that we can kind of use as the foundation. And then this kind of next level mindset sort of comes into play.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right.
So let's go ahead and Andrew's going to start to walk us through some sort of tangible next steps that we can sort of achieve this first through composition, and then we'll go into the editing piece after that.
Yep.
I love this. Anyone who's done any Discover Live events with me before has heard me talk about, I mean, my work is audience-centered communication. And it sounds like this is exactly what you all are promoting here, is thinking about how to best serve your audience, which is, I love that. And I don't typically think of photography in that way. So this is already exciting.
Awesome. Yeah, we love to hear that. We definitely love to hear that. So just quickly going through composition in general. Simply put, it's composition just means arranging elements in a way that it best suits the goal of the photo. You're the only one that knows that goal. No one else can tell you. And that's kind of the cool thing about photography as well too, because you could send 100 photographers out to a location and they could all come back with something different because they had a different goal or just something else in mind. But for us, the main purpose of composition then is to influence viewing behavior as well. And so what we're going to be teaching you is how to actually lead your viewer's eye to the image's focal point, and especially in a specific order, rather than just taking a photo to kind of like take a photo as well. As Kyle mentioned, yeah, there's definitely rules to follow, but composition itself isn't a set of rules. And as we all know, rules are meant to be broken too, but they can definitely help guide you along the way, especially when you're first getting started out as well. So with that, before we kind of jump into a few of those rules, I just want to talk about how you can even get started. And this for me was kind of the biggest thing that started changing my compositions. Is step one, when you show up to a scene, the first thing you really want to do is define your subject. And a lot of photographers or a lot of photos you can see, they miss this step completely. And a photo without a subject, it just isn't as powerful. So whether it's a person, whether it's an object, the subject could be a bridge. Obviously, like up in the Bay, the Golden Gate Bridge is a great subject, but it could literally just be anything. But it's important to define that subject. And then step two from that is essentially to just build your frame backwards from that subject. So you want to take the time to think about all the elements that are in the scene in front of you. And that way you can consciously place them specifically in different locations to essentially add impact to the photo. So different ways you can do that is like adding depth or using framing. You can place something in the foreground to help give it context or help lead off into your subject as well too. And as you're doing this, you're going to notice that just even the smallest little changes, like the direction of a leaf or something like that, can actually have a really big impact.
Yeah, so we're going to do a little exercise here, right? So this is probably an image that you've taken before. I know I've taken images like this before as well. Maybe even drop a comment in the chat if you have taken an image similar to this one. You're out at the beach, sunset's happening. You're like, wow, this is beautiful. You hold up your phone, you hold up your camera, you take the picture. And this photo is fine, right? We probably have, if we kind of think about what our subject is in this image, it's the sun. We've taken an image of the sun, and like this is composed fairly decently. In terms of like compositional elements, there's a nice even balance between the sky and the waves, right? So we have a nice split image. We have a nice center framing, our horizon straight. That's another really important one. But so, you know, there's nothing wrong with this image per se, but there's also nothing that necessarily wows about this image either. So taking this image and from the same location, let's look at some ways that we could maybe tell a much more compelling story, but changing the elements around. So we still have our main subject as the sun, but let's now look at a few different ways that we could tell a different story with the sun. So one thing we could do is we could zoom in, add a human element of a hand, and then wait till the right moment when some birds fly through the image. Or we could Photoshop them in if that's your prerogative later on. So here's now we can do something that's much different, right? We have now told a much different story about this scene, still using the exact same location, the exact same spot, just changing a few of our compositional elements, right? We could also, from that same scene, turn a little bit more to our right and reveal the beautiful Santa Monica Pier as well, right? Now, we could just take a photo of the Santa Monica Pier, but what if we then, instead of zooming in, we zoom out? And reveal a little bit more context of the scene. So instead now here we've gotten low to the ground. We have the seaweed that kind of adds a nice frame to our scene. We have some nice light catching that seaweed, which also sort of helps to add some contrast and some depth. And overall, the seaweed really helps to frame and add depth to the scene. And then we also have a nice compositional element of this leading line of the water that leads us straight to our background of the Ferris wheel and the roller coaster. And then we have the sun sort of acting more as a complement to the scene as opposed to being the main subject of the scene, right? So even just changing what our subject is can drastically change the story that we're telling. And another great thing about this is we have a nice foreground, midground, and background of the sky all kind of playing in nicely there. Now, another thing that we can do is we can walk along the beach a little bit further and maybe find some rocks that we can use to our advantage, right? So maybe we're still using that wide angle lens, but now we're slowing down the shutter to capture some motion rather than freezing the waves like we did on that last image. Now we also still have that split 50-50 composition between our horizon and our foreground, but now we're using leading lines that pull us into the rocks, and the sun's just a very nice little accent sun flare over the top of those rocks. So there's so many different things that we could do using some of these slight compositional changes, and all of it kind of comes back to taking a step back and thinking, what is my subject here? What's the story that I want to tell? If my story is the rocks, how can I lead people into these rocks instead of just taking a picture of the rocks and calling it a day? If I want to tell a story of the sun, instead of just taking a picture of the sun, maybe I add something in front of the sun that adds a little bit more to that. So start to be thinking about these different ways that you can just slightly switch up your composition, change up your focal length, change your shutter speed and your settings. Is the sun in, sorry, the sun is not the subject in this final image. Now it's just a slight flare at the tip of these rocks that's adding a nice complement to the image, but our subject is definitely now the rocks. Mm-hmm. Great question.
Yep. Okay. So great exercise. Again, it's just super important to start getting in that mindset of picking out a subject and then kind of like building out the scene behind it. And that's what's going to get your brain to start thinking about things in ways like this, where you're able to add foreground, midground, and background and just create, again, a lot more depth. But with that exercise now, let's move on to some of the actual rules and compositional techniques, right? And again, we want to cover a few of these just because they're super great. They're really good to help build out scenes more creatively. And all of these are just tried and trusted techniques too that are just really great to keep top of mind when you're out creating. And we can see probably by a show of hands, I'm sure most people in here have heard of the rule of thirds before. But essentially what you want to do is place your key points of focus on the intersection of the 3x3 grid. I don't know if you can see my mouse on the screen or not. I'm not sure how it's showing. Does it show for anybody? Maybe not. I don't think so. That's okay. So what you want to do essentially is, like in that top right image, how I've placed my subject on the bottom lower thirds. Those are just really nice points of intersection that give nice balance to the overall image. And what we recommend doing is actually making sure you have a 3x3 grid turned on your camera when you're out shooting. That way it's just going to make it a lot easier to compose your images rather than having to crop later on and figure things out after the fact, essentially. But another thing that it's really good for is providing balance to your image. So if you look at the lower left image here, that's just a really nice 3 strips of trees, essentially. So nothing is overpowering another one. It just, again, feels really nice and balanced. And that's because the tree lines are on those rule of third lines as well. And then lastly, again, taking this a step further. Oh, sorry.
No, I'm just going to pull this up here so folks can see the images a bit more clearly.
Oh, okay. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. And then, yeah, lastly is having the rule of space. So generally, if you have a human subject in your shot, you want them to be looking into frame versus out of frame, just because that gives it, again, it leads into the rest of the frame a lot better. And having them look out of frame just gives the viewer like an uneasy feeling as well too.
You'll see that rule broken often in cinema, where the person is kind of out of frame, looking out of frame, and it's meant to give you a feeling that that person is feeling trapped in that moment.
Yeah.
So a lot of these things are kind of like interchangeable between film and photography.
Totally.
Good point. Yep. All right.
Yeah, and another really great one is sort of centered composition and symmetry, right? So especially, I mean, most folks probably know Andrew and I more through Instagram than anywhere else, where vertical images and just in general vertical images are being, much more, just much more with the times, right? As we shift all of our content consumption to a vertical device in our hands. So this is a really nice, powerful one because it really fits the vertical composition or the vertical frame very nicely. So symmetry can really be used to sort of guide our viewer to a single point. And reflections can also be a really great sense of symmetry. This image on the right here is really nice because it's actually doubly symmetrical, right? We're symmetrical top and bottom and then symmetrical left and right as well. So it really guides our viewer's eyes straight to those mountains in the background, right? And really sort of like placing our main subject in the centermost part of the image or in a centermost part of the image and having sort of these converging leading lines or these converging symmetrical actions sort of like leading in can really help out quite a lot. And Albie, I think, had a question about, will we show actual editing? Yes, we absolutely will in just a moment.
Yep. Oh yeah, good question. All right, here next, this is one of my all-time favorites, and for anybody that knows my photography, this is like one of the things I'm always looking for, just pretty much all the time. But leading lines, and what that does is it gives you a really powerful and creative way to guide your viewer through the image in an exact way that you want them to go, because it's very natural for us to follow the line from where it starts to where it finishes. That's just human nature essentially. So, So what you can do essentially is place your main subject at that end of that line, and then the line is going to draw your viewer into it just really, really nicely and naturally. Again, it's a really good way to just make more interesting photos and add more depth to your scenes as well too. And as you can see here, the actual leading line could be really anything. Like it could be a rope, a railing, waves, rocks. There's really no limit to it, which is also really cool because I guarantee you anywhere you go out, you'll be able to find a nice leading line composition.
Sort of going back to that framing that we were talking about as well on our beach images, we can look for these natural frames anywhere as well. So on this bottom set of images, we can see that it's a drastically different scene by simply just shifting down a little bit. We have this agave plant, I believe it is, sort of as a foreground element on this bottom image. And if we just shift our focus down just a slight amount, now that agave plant frames the building and sort of creates a much different composition that really draws our viewer in. The same can be done with these bridge photos as well. We have that same building from the other side framed between the uprights of the building, or using leaves, or as we saw a little bit earlier, using those that seaweed. It can be a really, really fun way to kind of give the photo context, kind of pull you in, and kind of like draw out any distractions from the outside. So Andrew and I are always looking for things. Sometimes we'll even hold up things in front of our camera for one another to get different framings that might not necessarily be supernatural, but it does help to add a nice compositional element to it.
Exactly.
So in this instance, whereas Elliot was asking previously about whether the sun was still the subject, but it had actually shifted, but actually the subject became the rocks in the previous example. In these photos, you're still utilizing the same subject or telling a story of the same subject, but you're creating more of a frame for it and kind of helping your audience focus on what you want them to see in the subject. Would that be?
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, showing it in a more impactful and engaging way.
Gotcha.
Yep. Great question. Next, we've talked about this a lot, so definitely not going to really go into it in too much detail, but anytime you can add depth to an image, it's just going to help give it more of a three-dimensional look and feel to it. And using foreground is a really, really great way to do that. Generally, you want to have a wide angle lens and get closer down to that foreground element. And that's going to give it, again, like more of that three-dimensional look that you see in both of these examples here. Where this one, we're able to use rocks in the foreground, and in the second one, we're able to use that seaweed as well. And you can also, again, in that second image, you can use diagonal lines to help create even more depth, just because you can see it kind of going off into the distance a little bit more too.
Yeah, and this one isn't necessarily a compositional rule in and of itself, but sort of the contrast between minimalistic versus like more chaotic, right? So we could take the same scene in the same location and photograph it in different ways to give a much more different feeling, right? So an example could be inside of a club or a music venue. Hopefully we get to go do that soon again. But we could in much different ways. I think oftentimes we think about a club or a music venue as being sort of chaotic and a little bit blurry and energetic, right? So that bottom left image would be a pretty good representation. It's off tilted. We have some blurry movement in there. There's a lot of people, but there could be these sort of quiet solitude moments. For example, like having been a DJ myself, you're standing up on a crowd and you're on the stands and you're alone, right? And so that initial shot on the bottom right, it is, right? It can be telling a much different story about one person's experience in this venue. And we can kind of play off of this use of lots of different elements versus minimal elements to create a much different feeling as well.
Yep. I love that one. This is the last one also, but important to talk about too, just because balance is super important to an image. You want to make sure that your image doesn't feel like skewed one way or another, that if you have layers, that they're feeling like nice and balanced and even. The biggest thing with this that we see is if you have your one main subject, a really, really good way to help create a balanced scene is to have an opposing secondary subject. So in the two right-hand images, the right and then the bottom one, we have our main subject. At the bottom one, the main subject is at our top left thirds. And so what we've done is balanced out that subject with the bridge. And so if we had framed it any differently, it would have taken away from that main subject or just made it feel too heavy on one side. And then same thing with the image on the right. We have the trolley at the bottom right-hand thirds, and then we kind of lead through it off into the distance to that sun. And that gives us that just really nice balanced look and feel to it. And then of course, it's always important to just remember that rules are meant to be broken as well too. It's important to understand the rules and also why you're breaking them. But what's more important is just next time you go out with your camera and something starts to attract your attention, whatever that might be, it could be the sunset, for example. Don't really stress too much about the rules and instead just try to focus on composing with purpose. And then the rules are just there as kind of like a backbone to help through that process. And hopefully by doing this, you're going to just be able to create a lot more unique and powerful compositions that are going to help your images stand out more as well. All right.
Cool. So now that we have composed our images, we've taken a banger shot, we're ready to go, right? Obviously now the next step is we have to pull them into the computer, cull through them, find the best one, and start the processing journey, the post-processing journey. So Andrew's going to walk us through some kind of step-by-steps of how we can do some actually very simple tweaks to make some quite nice drastic changes to an image.
Yes. So before I just dive into that edit, covering editing in general, the main purpose of post-processing really is to just enhance the photo as you'd like. No one can really tell you, what you're feeling. So that's another really cool thing as well. But it also allows the photographer to adjust that raw data to help fit whatever they envisioned when they took the photo. We take this a step further where each setting that we're adjusting, we want to make sure it's adding value to the overall image. And we can do this by shifting focus away from those less important areas to the more important ones, such as like the subject, the leading lines, the frames, anything else you really want to highlight. And you'll notice that as soon as you start to begin to edit with purpose rather than being in the, I forgot what we call the slider fiddling stage, you'll notice that you're going to just start achieving like a lot better end results with your photos. So let's take a look at this example here then. What's the first thing you do when you sit down to edit a photo? And you can type it in the chat as well. You know, everyone has a different workflow or a different routine. Some people will dive into the tone curve right away, maybe get that over with because they might not fully understand it or something. Others, you know, you might start with the white balance, but there's an infinite number of things that you can do. But the most important is to stop, actually. So yeah, what we want
like I'm looking for the autocorrect button. I'm cropping. Oh yeah, there's some, okay. Okay, yep. I'm not alone in the crop. Yeah. Adjust the white balance as my, oh, Meyer's tone curve. Dylan fixing exposure.
Okay, awesome.
Resets.
Very cool.
All right, tell us why we're doing it wrong, Andrew.
So what we want you to do rather is actually just stop and take a step back. And before you dive into any of the settings, it's just so valuable to think about how you want the end result to look, or the feeling that you're trying to give the viewer, or where you want the focus of the image to actually be. And a lot of people don't do this, and they'll start just diving into the photo right away. And you lose a lot of the purposeful editing when you do that, because you don't actually have like an end goal in mind. And so, like I say, yeah, once you do this, you'll be able to then make a lot more of those intentional decisions throughout the whole process. And the photo in turn is just going to be a lot better at the end as well. And again, so what I'm going to be covering is not about presets. You know, presets are great. They can be a really good starting point, but they're only going to get you so far. The real secret to successful edits comes from selective tools. And the reason for that is they give you such fine control over the editing process that just you can't achieve with your global edits. And so the example that I'm covering right now, I'm only going to use selective edits, and we'll see what we can do with this photo here. Next. All right. So back to the photo. So after taking a second to analyze it, I've got a plan on how I want my viewer, or maybe all of you, to experience this photo with me, right? One of the main reasons why I woke up early to take this photo was because I wanted to capture that early morning light right as it hit the road right in the middle there. And I thought I'd be able to share my my pointer, so I'm not going to be able to, but I'll still be able to walk through this here. So that's right there. That for me is, like I said, one of the main reasons why I woke up early is I did research. I found that at that time of year, at that time of day, I'd be able to capture the light just as it came over the mountain and hit that little peak right there. So for me, that's my main subject. That's the thing I want to draw people into. Once you have like kind of determined that, now you can figure out what you need to do to help direct people to that point. So we have our step one, and now we're going through everything that we can do to help draw attention to that point there. For me, one of the first things I like to do is just remove anything that's taking my attention away from that spot. So for me, it's that little like purple light that was like, I think a road sign or something like that, where I just wanted to remove that right away, just because it wasn't adding any value to the shot. It was just taking too much of my attention away. And I want to do everything I can to make sure my viewers are looking right in the middle there.
Andrew, maybe just toggle back and forth from that so they can see what disappeared.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, let me know how it looks on your end as well too. So it's just that purple kind of billboard ad at the bottom there. that I just removed just because, again, it wasn't adding any value and it's just taking away from where I want people to be looking at. So next, now that I've kind of got that out of the way,
real quick, the way that we take that out is the spot removal tool. So up on this panel here, underneath the squiggly line up at the top right, there's the kind of sample and spot. So we just take that spot removal tool and click it on there, and it will use the AI to replace it with something nearby it.
Yep. Perfect. Thank you for that. I see also, isn't the curve of the street taking the viewer away from the city and out of the image, which is a good point, which is what I'm going to do in these next steps here is actually push light in from that top left part. So it actually pushes us back into the image while giving us a really natural way to highlight that main part of the image that we wanted to focus on there. And that's through these radial filters, which I'm going to show right here. So we've taken away that distraction down at the bottom. And now what I'm essentially going to do is build out a bunch of radial filters coming in from where the light actually naturally was, but I'm just going to enhance it a lot. And this is a really great way to help draw people back into the image. Again, to Raul's comment there, this is going to help push people back into the frame versus pulling them away from it. And this is a really good technique also to add more depth to the shot. Because if you notice with this shot here, we don't necessarily have like a foreground at all. We just have a midground and then a background. And so by adding in some really nice side light, what we're going to be able to do is just kind of almost fake a little bit more of that midground. But what you can see here is if you look at the settings on the slider there, what I've done is I've grabbed a gradient filter. I've added 15 to my temperature, making it a little bit warmer. I've added half a stop of exposure, and then I've turned down my clarity and my dehaze just a little bit. And you can see here the difference that makes. I've just done one radial filter so far there. And then I'm essentially going to keep those same settings and build up from that spot. And so you can see here the radial filter got bigger, still coming from that same area, but we're slowly just building it up and pushing people back into that curve of the road that we want them to be looking at.
And this is a second radial filter that Andrew's adding here.
Yep, second one. And I think by the end, we're going to have a good amount. I don't know how many. Here's another one. Again, I've just been still keeping those same settings. And the reason why, that got out of order. Whoops, that's okay. I don't know how that happened, but so essentially I've added a couple additional radial filters there. It's all with the same settings. And the reason why we have so many versus just one is because we can fine tune it and control it a lot more. We're able to actually like move each of the gradients around, each of the radials around a lot more and give it that nice natural looking effect as well.
If we also think about the way that the sun actually operates, it's not just one big thing that emanates light. It's white hot in the center, and then it slowly gets less and less bright. So by adding these multiple different gradients or multiple different radials, it's actually adding that light in the same way that it would actually naturally appear from the sun.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of like you're just giving more. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Andrew. More levers to pull or dials really to make the resulting image more precisely what you've actually taken a picture of.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yep.
Got it.
Yeah, you're able to control things just a lot better.
Yeah.
And then after I do radials, I'll also do gradients. And again, you can see here I've added a little temperature, a little exposure, and I'm just I'm adding more light to the right-hand side. And what I want to do now is kind of darken up the whole left-hand side because I want the focus to be on the middle. And by darkening the left, it's going to enhance what I've done even more on or by darkening the right, it's going to enhance what I've done more on the left as well too. So you can see here, darkening up that left-hand side just by a couple points of exposure. Same thing with the bottom there. There's not too much of interest for me. So again, I just want to get rid of that. Anytime you want to put focus on something, an easy thing to do is just increase exposure. And then anytime you don't want people to be looking at anything, you decrease the exposure. And again, just pulling down on the sky now, that's helping give us like a natural, nice looking vignette. Same thing from that other side on the opposing top right-hand side. And these are just with small little adjustments. Same thing that we did with like composition, how small little things can make a big difference. That's the same thing with editing as well too. And then lastly, what I did here was just add in a little bit of my brush tool. So I just brushed in, you can see the difference that it makes there. Just brushing in a little extra light, a little extra warmth as well too, to bring us back into that middle point even more. And so now let's go back. This was where we started. This was just like the raw image. And then that is where we ended and we didn't touch anything else aside from our selective adjustments. So radials, gradients, and then a little bit of brushing. You can see just how much difference it can make. And looking at this image here, you wouldn't really guess it, but you're actually really forced to kind of look at that middle point versus this where your focus is a lot more like up on the top right-hand side. You're pulled a little bit towards that like purple light down at the bottom as well. Versus this, we knew that we wanted to focus our attention of the viewer onto that middle point. And so everything that we did was essentially to help drive our viewer to that main point there. And then this was just like a little crop and whatnot as well too there, just to kind of like finish it off. But yeah, if anyone
that answers Neuron Jen's question about cropping the foreground.
Okay, yeah, I would crop and then I would actually Photoshop out. I can't show my mouse, but that building at the very top right-hand side, I would actually prefer to remove that as well, and so that I can still have a nice centered city, but that building is just taking a little too much attention as well. So that would be another thing that you could do. But yeah, if there's any other questions, feel free to shoot them in, and we can also answer them at the end as well too.
Nakashi is asking how you would increase the clarity of this picture if you wanted to.
So it depends where you would want the clarity to be. I generally don't like to push or pull my clarity more than like 5 or 10 either direction, just globally. It's a lot better to use the same technique where you can actually either paint in clarity or use like a gradient or a radial filter to put the clarity where you would want it to go. I think it's a little soft just because of the presentation here actually. On my screen, it's a lot sharper. But yeah, what I would do then is I would just like brush in some clarity maybe onto the road itself, just because that's where I want the attention to be. And I don't want to overly edit the photo and make it all kind of like look a little too much essentially. Yeah, it's a great question. Any other questions or?
Actually, how are we doing on time? Do we have to speed things up a little bit?
I think we're good so far. Okay. Yeah. Do you want to keep a few? There are a few sort of more general questions that we can get to once you all are done, kind of with the meat of the presentation here. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah, I'm seeing a good question here about AI-driven editing, and like Luminar, I think is a great tool. I love the opportunity and sort of the democratization of editing. And I think Luminar does a really good job of that. I will say though, I think it's really important to have this fundamental understanding of what's happening behind it, because that's how you're like, Luminar is not going to be able to do what Andrew just did, right? Andrew is making a decision of where he wants the viewer to look. and he's making those decisions by being very selective over where he's putting that in. You can still do that type of thing in Luminar, but you need to still have the understanding and the foundation of where am I going to be having my viewer look? Why am I going to have them look that way? I think Luminar, like one of the more popular things to do with that is like a sky replacement, right? But really sort of having this understanding of where light's coming from and why you want to maybe be shifting the light from one direction will be really important. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a Luminar sky replacement where the sky is actually backwards. So the foreground, the light's coming in from this way, but in Luminar, you've added the sky where the light's coming in from this way. So sort of having that baseline understanding of why you're doing things and how to do things is important before you just let the machines take over our entire lives, would be my opinion.
Yeah. Great tools that make things easier, but yeah, the baseline mindset and like knowing the how and the why is always going to be super important. Yep.
There's also an element of, just to return back to the initial proposition of this workshop, right? Like purpose and intentionality behind the story that you're telling. We're not, I think this is true across so many artistic fields where we're seeing all these technological advancements that do a great job of democratizing skill building, but we're not quite at the point yet where the machines know our intention as storytellers and the purpose that we're trying to achieve, right? So there still is that element of understanding how to bridge the gap between the story that's in your mind that you want to tell and the technique and the why of how to get there.
Yep. Yeah, that's one thing we talk about quite a bit, is just the importance of storytelling, especially with like you said, all these improvements with AI and technology and everything.
Yeah, and to the question about Lightroom versus Photoshop, this is a simplified example. Like Andrew would not be done with this image. This is just kind of the start to get you guys a little taste of sort of these selective tools that we would use. And the good thing about Photoshop is, using the camera raw filter in Photoshop, it is a clone of Lightroom. So anything that you only know how to do in Lightroom, you can also do it in Photoshop. But Photoshop is definitely where we're spending a high majority of our time. And that's, as we get, bearing the lead here for getting into the course, we actually do spend a lot of the time doing a lot of these things on steroids in Photoshop as well.
Yep. Lots of good questions. Lots of awesome questions. Awesome. Well, we are almost done. I'll let Kyle walk through one more example here that we wanted to highlight for editing with purpose as well.
Yeah, and we won't go into this one too much, but just, this, Andrew was kind of all talking about like how we can shape light to kind of tell a different story. But we can also do so with color, right? The way that we kind of isolate or select or change and manipulate colors can really sort of dictate how the viewer is kind of feeling about our image when they're looking at them. So here's one example. I'll show this raw image. So this is an image taken from Mount Tam in the Bay Area. We have this nice, beautiful fog coming over the hills, and we have a pair of people who's standing on this hill, right? And so we can use our color grade to tell whatever story we want about this couple, for example, right? So if we go to the next slide, we could use super warm tones and have a really warm edit. And warm kind of like would represent that warmth and love and passion, gives maybe kind of like a warm and cozy feeling, right? So if we apply this warm edit to an image, maybe it sort of paints a picture of these two that maybe they're lovers, they're sharing a passionate sunset, this beautiful moment that they're having, right? But then we could shift things entirely the opposite way, and we could have a really cold edit, right? We could take that I have the settings here if you want to like take a screenshot of these settings to try something a little bit similar, right? Now we kind of have this almost as if it's lit by the moon, right? And they're maybe stealing like a hidden moment, or maybe this is the last time that they'll see each other for a long time before they, go off and go to different colleges or something like that, and they'll never see each other again. I don't know. We could paint whatever story we want to tell just by changing the temperature and the warm or coolness of an image, right?
Yep. Super important. Yeah, color is huge with photography. It's huge with any sort of visual art as well, as Ashley, too. So that's a really good example there, Kyle. Moving on here, though, just to kind of wrap things up, key takeaways from this is just the photography with purpose mindset. Again, it's just super important We've talked about it throughout the whole entire process, but just getting into that mindset of doing things with a purpose and having a goal or a vision in mind, and that's going to help you bring that to life a lot more. Creating unique and powerful compositions that are going to allow your images to stand out from the crowd. So again, it's picking a subject, building out the scene from that. We showed and talked about using light to shape an image and really drive attention to a certain area. And then Kyle covered using color to evoke emotion as well. Oh, and then one thing that we wanted Ashley to do, if possible, would you be able to, oh, I guess we can ask as well. We'd love to hear what was the number one thing that you learned from the workshop so far today, just in the chat as we kind of keep moving here as well.
I'll type.
Awesome. And then Kyle, do you want to introduce?
Yeah, so we had a question in there. What will you guys be offering more elaborate and in-depth editing tutorials? Great segue,
Why,
questioner.
yes.
Wonderful. So yes, we do have what we have dubbed the Photography for Creators course. So it is all of this, this was a quick little 45-minute sneak peek, but we have a 5-module course that we've put together. It's about 70 different lessons, about 20 hours of content, my face, Andrew's face, walking through all this stuff from start to finish. We kind of really anchor first on module 1 of the fundamentals. So really establishing some of that baseline mindset that we talked about, figuring out those camera settings, gear choice, weather tracking, figuring out where to shoot, when to shoot, why to shoot, all those things. And then we start to dive into the module 2 of controlling composition. And one of the things that we really wanted to do differently from a lot of other courses out there is actually take you out in the field with us. So I'm filming Andrew as he's assessing a scene, finding multiple different compositions at the same place. So you can go to the same place for one sunrise and get 70 different photos, for example, right? And we do this at multiple different locations all around the state of California. And then we have the technical tactician, where we sort of get some of these tools and tool belts, these tools and editing tools that you can add to your editing tool belt.
Something about a belt.
I love
You're going to have a much better looking outfit, and it's going to be much more functional by the end of this.
Usually I say that point. Usually I say that spiel a lot better, but the idea here is the way that you can determine how you want to take an edit. You sort of have to have this foundational set of skills that you can be like, oh, I know if I want somebody to look at this thing, I can use this, and this tool, and then you can start to utilize them. So module 3 is all about those different editing tools. And then module 4 is where we start to do some really interesting, fun things like the sky replacements, flipping skies, changing things from day to night, adding in Milky Ways, all the crazy, crazy stuff. That's what we do in the Editing Wizard. And then module 5, a huge request that we've gotten from a lot of people is we want to see a full start to finish edit. And the issue with full start to finish edits is they take an hour and they don't perform well on YouTube because nobody wants to sit through an hour-long video on YouTube. So that's why you don't see them. We have put all of those into, we each have 3, so 6 total start to finish edits. Again, we try to incorporate as much different stuff within those start to finish edits. So we have night shots, sun shots, city shots, nature shots, combining multiple different images, doing as much as we can so you get as many different elements all kind of combined into one full start to finish. And then we also have some bonuses in there as well. So we have a separate module on social media. Andrew put together a separate module on mobile photography.
Very cool.
It's a lot. It's a lot in there. It's jam-packed. The idea is that this is supposed to be the one course that you need on all things photography.
Mm-hmm. And it's awesome. I'll jump in for a second, because as somebody who is, I'm very immersed in the world of online course content. And what I love about what y'all are doing is, and you can see it even in the just the promo video from that I dropped the link into the chat here. But you mentioned going out in the field. But really, I mean, for me, when I talk to friends who are photographers, and I'm like, okay, we're both looking at the same thing right now, like the scenario, the same setting. How are you going to take a picture that is going to be different than how I'm going to take this picture? And that's really, you know, for somebody who is trying to kind of internalize what that looks like. I love that you all do that time out in the field, and it makes it very clear and tangible what, you know, how you're putting into practice the theories that you're promoting and that you're teaching, which is, I think, a really cool. I love that you've done that in this model, just from like a learning theory perspective. I think it makes for great course content.
That's awesome to hear. And we both got started doing like one-on-one or small group workshops, like in person. And so we've essentially replicated that as best as we possibly could with that whole module there, to give people that like experience as if they're out there with us and us talking through things and showing them things like one-to-one essentially. So yeah, we definitely like are really happy that we were able to put that module together.
That's awesome. So we are about out of time now. Folks, please join me in thanking Kyle and Andrew here for this terrific content. I don't know if you guys are tracking the comments, but there's a ton coming in about how all of these examples that we went through today are already really helpful, framing and adding radials in. The radial lesson, I think, is a big game changer for a lot of folks.
Love it.
Yeah, which is great. So thank you all so much for sharing your wisdom and putting it in this very digestible and tactical format, because, you know, having folks saying like, oh, I can do this, I can put this into practice right away. So that's great. Audience, definitely, you know, check out this course. Do you guys want to say just a little bit about the sweet deal we've got going on here?
Yeah, so this is the first time we've actually offered a deal on the course since we launched it. And I know Ashley put the link in the chat. We also have a link at the bottom of this page there, but we're offering, it's normally $350 for unlimited access. For anyone that watched through to the end here, we're offering just $299 with the code DISCOVER. And we're really excited to do this. Again, yeah, it gives you 24 access to all of the training, so you can do it at your own pace. The cool thing is, as well as we have a private community that you would be granted access to, that is full of hundreds of other students that are taking the course at the same time, or maybe have already taken it, but everyone's there, super supportive. Everyone, if you post a question or a comment or want some feedback on a photo, there's people there to just jump on that and help you with that as well too. And then again, yeah, we have access to all the files through every lesson, so you can actually have the same image up and walk through it with us together too, which we found was super helpful. And then we do have a lot of just unreleased presets, actions, tone curves, all those things that are just really great starts. And then we show you how to get the most of them and kind of work from them as well too.
Amazing. So audience, thank you so much for joining us and for your really thoughtful questions. And just to reiterate, you'll get a replay of this really informative session. So stay tuned for be on the lookout for an email from Discover. And I think we also might have some additional goodies for you in there from Andrew and Kyle that you've heard them talk about already today. So check out that course. You'll have access to the replay. Definitely check that out. And thanks so much for joining us. Andrew, Kyle, this has been really terrific. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and for the work that you're putting out into the world. As I'm sure you've been able to tell from the comments, it's greatly appreciated on many levels.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining. It's been a total blast, and we look forward to seeing a lot of you in the course too.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Ashley, as well.
My pleasure. Have a great rest of your day, evening, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Awesome. Bye. Thanks, everybody.